In Boy Scouts, I will never forget the first time I went camping during a storm. Has anyone ever camped during a storm? It's not fun. Now, what made this one worse was it was my very first camping experience as a Boy Scout. So at the very beginning, I thought that all Boy Scout camping experiences were terrible and bad. I also know that because I was young, everything seems bigger, right? Like, buildings seem bigger, houses seem bigger, cars, and situations seem bigger as well. And so this was a storm that I had gone through that was not pleasant. I know exactly where I was at. We were camping in Jack London Square in San Francisco. And there's some campsites there, and my mom, who, she was like, I don't know how to pack, because I didn't know how to pack for myself, so my mom, helped me, pack for this camping trip. And Mom's like, well, what are you going to need? You're going to need the clothes you're wearing, and then you're going to need, you're a boy, so you're probably going to change your clothes once, right? You get there Friday night, and then Saturday change your clothes, and then probably wake up Sunday and come home and you'll be fine, right? So I had my clothes on, and then I had an extra set of clothes. And I ended up also, during that time, I became tent mates with the quartermaster. Now, if you don't know who the quartermaster is the one that's supposed to bring all the food and supplies. And you want to make sure that all that stays safe. So in our tent, we had this big giant cooler, and it held all the milk. So that's what we had. So I remember we get there, and it's raining. And, first of all, when you're a kid, it doesn't really matter. You get wet. I'll take it. It's not that big of a deal. And but I remember as the night started wearing on, we're running around, I am soaked to the bone, and I'm realizing usually when you're at home, you just, go inside, you change your clothes, you sit by the heater maybe, you put on some fuzzy slippers, you get warm pretty quick. Well, I didn't realize that when you're camping, there's no indoor heater, really. And so I remember I crawl into bed, and I'm like, I'm freezing. And the storm is still going, and it is pounding on things. And I'm like, I need to get out of these wet clothes. So I changed out of my clothes, and I put on my only set of dry clothes. Put them on, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. I'm still a little cold, but I kind of got into my sleeping bag, and it's still raining outside, and it's getting harder, and it's really loud, and everything's kind of wet, but I finally actually I go to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I remember waking up because I had this weird sensation that I was swimming in a pool. And so I wake up, and sure enough, there was probably about that much water inside my tent. And what was also fun about it was somehow the quartermaster, when he brought the milk, he didn't bring a brand new milk. He grabbed a 3/4 milk, which means that the top, and he didn't secure it very well. So I wake up, and I turn on my flashlight, and it's white. And I'm like, wait. And of course now I am soaked, and I'm like, what do I... I'm sure it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, what do I change? And it was still raining all night long. Oh my gosh, that was, and maybe that's why to this day I kind of have a little bit of, hesitancy, especially camping, especially when it's raining. That's a no-go for me. I don't care what you have. I don't care if you got dry stuff and your tent can do blah, blah. No. The rain, it's loud, and it's scary. We're going to encounter a storm here in Acts 27 with Paul, and the storm is going to be really, really bad. And it's going to obviously affect Paul, but it's also going to affect a lot of other people. And obviously with metaphors, what's nice about it is we can learn, because the storm that Paul and these people are going to encounter is not just like a storm, but it really is a fear of life. It is something that they don't have any control over. And it's interesting to watch what Paul does. He is in a situation that is out of control for everybody, But instead of not saying anything, Paul stands up and gives words of encouragement. And it will help us see when and how we can also provide words of encouragement and help to people who might be experiencing a storm. And again, we would be using this in the figurative, not a storm like Monday it's going to rain again and be bad like that, but a storm in your life. A storm where something bad has completely taken place and you are out of control. You find out that your child is sick with cancer and now you are out of control. You just got notification, you just bought a brand new house and you're stretched thin with your finances, and then you lose your job. And now you have no idea what's going to happen next. Or you're married and your spouse comes home and lets you know that the divorce proceedings will start up next month. And your storm is raging around you and you don't know what to do. How do we, as Christians, first of all, go through the storm? And second of all, what can we do to help those around us? That's what we're going to be learning today. All right. Paul is been set free in terms of he's been released from the grip of Agrippa and Festus. Oh, come on, Rich, that was worthy of a boo. The grip of Agrippa. And he's going to be sailing to Rome. And he is going to be heading in a way that is not only over land, but a lot over sea in order to get all the way to Rome, Italy. So, when it was decided that we would sail for Italy, and of course, notice that we are back in what is called the we passages. So these we passages means that Luke, the author, is also with him. We would sail for Italy. Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius who belonged to the imperial regiment. Now, if you are a centurion over a regiment, that you are a high mucky muck. And you are going to be transferred along with other prisoners. And we don't know the fate of these prisoners. We don't know, are these prisoners also, they've appealed to Rome? Are these prisoners just being transported so that they can ultimately see their fate be culminated in a death sentence? It's hard to know exactly what these are. Based on what happens a little bit later on, which we'll talk about next week, it seems like these guys are not good guys, and they're probably being sent in order to finally execute them. Does anyone remember the fantastic, we just watched it recently, the fantastic Nicolas Cage movie, Con Air? This is Con Ship. Okay? So it's a similar thing where you've got all these convicts on this plane, but it's also very interesting. I'd be fascinated to find out if there was any overlap, because with Con Air, the Nicolas Cage character is a Marine who had beat up someone in a bar fight over his girlfriend and ended up killing him, so he was actually been prosecuted. So he's being transported to go home, where all these other people are going to be transported to other high maximum things. So it's kind of a similar thing. There's Paul, who's going to Rome just in order to stand trial, and then you got all these other convicts. So we got the con ship, and we boarded a ship from Adramyttium about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. Now, I'm not going to make a big deal about it, but it is very interesting. How does Paul, a prisoner, have allowed with him Luke and Aristarchus? I mean, normally you're not going to have, like, if you're a prisoner, it's not like, oh, can I bring along a couple of friends with me? So one of two things actually had to happen. Either one, Aristarchus and Luke had to become slaves of Paul, and since Paul was a prisoner who had appealed to Caesar, he had not received a conviction yet, and they would allow it. There's other evidence, though, that could also support that Aristarchus and Luke had to become prisoners themselves in order to travel with Paul. Now, that's pretty gutsy. I mean, I understand that you probably don't have a friend quite like that. I will go to prison with you. I will be held just like you because I want to support you. And it's not something that I'm going to do it for a day or a couple of days. We're going to get on a ship together in the Khan ship, and I'm going to be hanging out with a bunch of really bad people. Aristarchus and Luke obviously are demonstrating a depth of love that we typically only see in one person, and that's Jesus Christ. One person who's willing to come down, be among us, take on what we have. Jesus, the one who has no sin, became sin for us so that we could become the righteousness of God. It's very amazing to watch what Aristarchus and Luke do. But I'm going to go ahead and just let that marinate with you. It's an interesting thing, but not the main point. So verse 3. The next day, we landed at Sidon, and Julius's favorite color? Yes, thank you. There you go. I had written that in there. I'd forgotten that. Rich asked me, is there any jokes that he's going to be able to boo at? And I was like, I can't remember, but I'd written that one in there. Yep. So we got Sidon, we got Julius. In kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so that they might provide for his needs. And from there we put out to sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. When we sailed across the open sea off the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandria ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. So they got so far because they knew that this was not going to be a nonstop flight to Rome, that they needed to transfer ships. So they knew they had to sail in a certain direction. They got pretty far, and then they hopped off the boat and said, okay, where do we go now? Oh, hey, here's one that's going where we need to go. Let's hop on that ship, and we'll be able to do this. So this new ship is making way for Italy, and they put us on board. Verse 7, we made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite Salmone. If you could kind of picture it, you've got, the land is here, and you've got the sea here, and they're kind of doing this, but eventually they've got to go like this. And so that's going to be difficult to do. So they're like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go to Crete, which is not that far from Greece, right? It's not too difficult. And they're going to say, we're going to go to the south side, that's the lee side, so that the wind that is blowing won't affect us as much. And so they're like, let's go to the lee side of Crete and kind of skirt the island so that we're going to be okay. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lasea. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the fast. After the fast means that we are probably somewhere around October 5th, 59 AD. Now, I'm not an expert in the weather patterns of the Mediterranean during this time, but as we're going to see really quickly, in that time there's a lot of bad storms that pop up in the Mediterranean. And so they're now getting to the point where it's getting very close to not being safe to sail. It's like planning a Boy Scout trip in November in San Francisco. You're probably going to hit a storm. So Paul, who seems to know enough about this, and there's others that are there, so Paul warned them. Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also. But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete facing both southwest and northwest. So Paul's like, guys, I'm looking at this, and this does not look good, and I think we should probably stop. But they're like, the problem is we're in a harbor that we cannot stay in over the winter time. So we just have to keep going. Again, this is great stuff. There's great application. I'll just say it. It's not the main point of it. But there's times that we get advice, maybe from people that we know, or the best part is when we get advice and guidance from God himself. And then we decide to take a poll, an internal poll. Well, okay, God says I should do this, but I'm kind of the pilot of my own ship, and I can direct my own way. And where I'm at, I'm really not happy about. And so I think that I'm going to override God's decision and just simply go my own way. Out of curiosity, has anyone ever done this? Have you ever gone against God's will, and when you did so, you knew that you were doing something you shouldn't do, but you went ahead and did it anyway? Anyone? Only me. Okay. Oh, good. A couple of you out there. The rest of you, hopefully you're raising your hand. Now, question, did it end well? I tried to go through a bunch of the dumb mistakes that I've done in my life. I don't remember any of them like ending in a thing like, well, that was, you know what? I'm glad I ignored God on that one, because he obviously had no idea what he was doing. Never happened. So, again, this is a little bit of a stretch because obviously Paul not being God, and we're just talking about winter and storms. But again, if we are using the storm as a metaphor, I think there's many a times that we have gotten advice and information, and instead of following it, we charted off on our own path. Well, let's see what happens. Verse 13, when a gentle south wind began to blow, they thought they had obtained what they wanted. So if it's a south wind, that means it's from the south. That's what they're saying. So they're on the southern side of Crete. So if the wind is blowing you towards Crete, you're safe, right? You can start going along, and if the winds get too strong, it's just blowing you back onto land, and you can find a place to harbor, and you'll be fine. So this is good. Like, okay, we're at Crete. And they're also weighing anchor, right? So they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. They've got this wind blowing, and it's gentle. It's nice. I love gentle winds. I don't like storms. I don't like them at all. Verse 14, before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the nor'easter swept down from the island. So if it's a nor'easter, that means it's coming from the northeast, which means it's blowing southwest. And if you are on the south side of the island, what is it going to do? It's going to start blowing you out to sea. So this is very typical, just like we have wind patterns ourselves. Every October, we get those wonderful things called Santa Ana winds, and it doesn't matter how hard you try to stop them, they're going to blow, and it's going to be miserable and terrible. This is what's happening. They came dangerously close to ending up in a really bad situation, and now they have found themselves, they are in fact in that situation. This hurricane force, and it's funny because it actually has a name, and the meaning of the name is typhoon. So, yeah, this is not a gentle south-blowing breeze. This is a hurricane that is sweeping down. So the ship, verse 15, was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind. Because If you can go into the wind and get back up to Crete, you could harbor again. But they couldn't. Every time they started sailing towards Crete, they essentially just kept getting blown backwards. So we gave way to it, which is in nautical terms meaning pulled up the anchor, maybe drag it a little bit to give us some stability, but the wind is in control, and we're just going to start sailing. Oh my goodness. That's a terrifying prospect. They didn't have radios to call out an SOS. They had no idea how long this wind pattern was going to stay. The Mediterranean Sea is really big. And if you get blown out to sea and your ship falls apart, you're done. This ain't no rescue helicopter is going to fly in. You're gone. So the moment they finally said, we're just going to have to let it go and see where this ends, most of them at this point are realizing we are dead. That's how bad this is going. This is not just a small storm. This is a big storm. This is not just, oh, let's ride it out and we'll be okay. This is, my life is now fundamentally changed because of it. Obviously, we've been riding a storm for a year through a deadly virus that has killed over 500,000 people, and your lives are different, aren't they? Some of you experienced death in your family, which is a storm where you go, I have no idea which way I should be pointing my boat. I don't even know if I'm going to make it. Some of you have had relationship issues, especially when divorces and long-term families, those are on the rise, partially because of the other storm. People are splitting, and now they have to not only go through a pandemic, but they're going to go through a divorce, and their lives are fundamentally changed. This is scary. So Paul and the rest of them, not sure what they're going to do. They give way, and they were driven along. As we passed by the lee side of a small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. So right off of Crete, there is a small island, and they're thinking, if we can get the lifeboat and get into it, we could make the island before we are lost forever at sea. When the men had hoisted it aboard, they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together, fearing that they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis. They lowered the anchor and let the ship be driven along. Their last hope is gone. They tried to get the lifeboat. That didn't work. They tried to use the lifeboat to buoy up the boat itself. That didn't work. That got lost. The winds got harder, and you got to imagine what it must have felt like as the winds are driving them, and they're looking back at that small little island, and it starts to shrink and shrink and shrink, and soon they can't even see it anymore. And now they are in a storm much bigger than Jack London Square. Storm much bigger, maybe even a pandemic. They are now facing certain death on this storm. Have you ever faced that? Have you ever gotten to a point where death is at your door and there is nothing you can do about it? Have you ever gotten to a point where maybe it's not death, but maybe it's your own mental health, and you are at the breaking point, and you are, the land is gone. All I see ahead of me is a storm, and I don't know if we're going to be able to sail this sea and the ship's going to hold together all the way to Africa. I'm going to break. This is the type of storm. So let's see what happens. They're being driven along, verse 18. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. Okay, that's when you realize what's important in life. If you were on this ship and you had with you a chest of gold, how much are you going to hold on to that? That's going to take me down. You have all this grain, right? This is a grain ship. And as they're transporting this grain, this is their money. This is their livelihood. But then they start realizing that if we don't jettison this stuff, it will kill us. And sometimes storms are really super helpful in showing us what's most important. Maybe in the middle of your storm, it's your mom or your dad that anchors you, and everyone else has abandoned you, and you feel lost, battered at sea, but your mom or your dad are there. Or maybe you're in the middle of a storm, and you got all these friends, all these likes on social media, but there's that one friend who comes to the hospital because your mom is dying and just sits with you. These are the people that you're going to find out really quickly who are the most valuable. You find out that my money doesn't really do me much good. My fame doesn't do me any good. My popularity doesn't do me any good. My 401k, that's not going to do me any good when I'm facing death. And when you're with mental health and you're at the point of breaking, does anything else matter than just surviving to the next day? So they start throwing stuff overboard. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hand. What would their tackle, what does that mean? Now their ability to catch food is gone. The stuff that is left for survival is being chucked. It's getting desperate. And then, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. Now that's darkness. The sun and stars have not shown up. The storm is raging down. There is no end in sight. And did you notice who gave up hope of being saved? We gave up hope, which means that Luke himself, Luke the doctor, Luke the one writing the Gospels, Luke the one that we would think, he's the one that's got enough faith, right? He's the one that can survive all this. Luke himself gives up hope. He's like, that's it. We're done. We have no hope. And if you've ever been at a point where there is no hope, that is the worst thing ever. And if you've ever experienced that, it is something that you never ever want to go back into again, because the feelings of hopelessness are hard to get out of. And that's where they find themselves. Question: why didn't Paul say anything? Do you see the next couple of words? After the men had gone a long time without food. So Paul, right, does Paul know where he's going? Paul's been told he's going to Rome. He's going to stand trial there. Paul thinks he's going to make it there. But I also have a feeling at this point, Paul's probably like, I don't see no end in sight. This is getting really bad, and I'm not too sure if we're going to be able to make this. And he is not, this is important. He is not standing up making empty promises that he himself cannot keep, nor that he has permission to share with other people. I do not like it when Christians give out false hope to people. It happens too often. You look at someone and they're just hurting, and you're thinking, I got to do something. I've got to say something. So I come up with some good Christian cliche like, well, if God sees you to it, he's going to see you through it. Oh my, ha, ha. Or, wow, you must have a really strong faith to be going through such really bad situations. No, what do you have? Oh, yeah, that's out of curiosity, do any of these sailors have faith? I don't think any, like these are prisoners, like Con Air, right? This Con ship, they don't got no faith. And Paul's not standing up there saying, hey guys, don't worry, God's got this, right? We do this so often with people. When I've heard pastors give advice when a couple is in the process of splitting. And I've heard some people say, well, I just give them hope and tell them that they're going to get back together. Does that happen all the time? Do even Christian couples divorce? And if you sit there and say, oh, well, no, you're not going to divorce. And maybe you're trying with all your might to give some sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. And so you say, oh, you're not going to divorce, but sometimes it happens. How many times I've been at the bedside of someone who is about to enter into eternal rest. And I wondered, is my faith just lacking? Why don't I just simply heal them in Jesus' name? And some people, when they've experienced tragedies like accidents, and they're like, oh, they're going to pull through. Don't worry. They're going to pull through. Well, how do you know? Did God tell you? If God told you, I mean, that's a totally different story. But also, Christian, do not give false hope when there is none to be given. False hope drives you along and doesn't anchor you. If you're going to give advice, give anchoring advice, i.e., in the middle of your storm, God will not leave you. Is that a promise? Is that a promise you can give? Is that a promise you can give and you are 100% confident that God will fulfill that promise? Oh, absolutely. Yeah, now we're talking about this. Now we're talking about helping people and giving them what they need. Don't give them false hope. Give them hope that anchors them. So Paul, we're going to find out what's going to happen. He's going along. He's probably been puking his guts out. Now all the food's gone. Most of it's gone. I think there's actually a little bit left. And Paul is it finally stands up, and they haven't gone. Like, I could not imagine being at Jack London Square without like the basic necessity of milk. But these people, it's even worse. Everything is being lost. And so Paul, I think Paul says something I don't like. I don't know if it was inspired by God to say. But some people are like, well, no, he said it, so God must have wanted them to say it. But I don't know. I just think it's kind of dumb. Listen to what he says. Men, you should have taken my advice. Right? I told you so. But yeah, and we're good at that, right? If our kid makes choices that are not good, Mark Thomas, don't stick your finger in the light socket. Jacob, don't touch the grill. It's really hot. Joshua, don't eat that much chocolate cake. And then what happens? The kid gets a little zapped, the hand gets a little burned, and someone gets a little sick at night. These are just fictitious stuff. I'm just making this up. And then what do we do as parents? Told you not to do it. Because we're good at that. And if you find yourself saying, I told you so, to friends and family who make bad decisions, I think it would just be better if you stay quiet. The one thing Paul does, which I'm going to applaud him for, is he doesn't stop with, I told you so, you shouldn't have done that. But he goes on to give some good news. I'm ripping this line off. Don't tell people I told you so unless you also can follow it up with the good news. Good news of hope, good news of joy, good news of grace in Jesus Christ. I thought that was great. So he's like, men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Last night, an angel of the God whose I am and whom I serve stood beside me and said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you." So Paul didn't stand up with false hope beforehand. Paul didn't sit there and go, "Well, this is a wonderful turn of events, and these people are getting their just due, so I'm just going to eat my popcorn and watch this whole thing unveil before me." Paul stood up and said something. I know that hope is in short supply. It seems to have really waned, especially this year. I think people are experiencing kind of a storm upon storm upon storm. And I think there's times when if you've got your anchor and you're in the storm yourself, but maybe you can give some hope, maybe I think it's time we stand up. I think we need to stand up and say something. Not stand up and say, "Well, told you so." Not stand up and say, "Well, you know what? It'll all be fine. Nothing bad's going to happen." But he spoke up when he had an angel of the Lord show up. So this isn't, again, I'm sure Paul's sitting there in his little thing and the boat is rocking and he's puking and everything's bad. And he's like, "Well, this is where I'm going to die. Didn't quite make it to Rome." And an angel of the Lord had to show up, right? Again, some people are like, "I wish an angel would show up to me." No. If an angel shows up to you, that means that what you're going through is really, really super bad, or you're about to go something that's really, really super bad, and you're going to need some extra assurance of it, and that's what Paul is getting. This angel says you're going to make it. And not only you, but the lives of the people around you. And again, this is where I think Christians can start doing something incredible, because we often say, "Oh, well, those people out there, right? We're good at preaching against all them, those bad people all out there." Do you realize that through your actions and through your words, it can have eternal consequences in their lives? For Paul, it's as if God says, "Look, Paul, I'm going to save your life." And God could have just said, "You know what? I'm just going to have everyone else drown," right? Con ship, they're all dead, but I'll just save Paul. No, it's amazing how our faith can at times extend to those around us. So when you see a wayward son that isn't believing as much and you're thinking, "What do I need to do?" Maybe you just need to be praying. Maybe you need to be loving. Maybe you need to be caring. And maybe your faith needs to be bolstered, because it will be a shining light for someone who's losing their way. Or maybe your roommate in college is not doing well, and they are swamped and they are overwhelmed and they don't know what to do and they don't know Jesus, but they look at you and they see something different. They see a light. They see something shining. And all of a sudden your faith starts extending to them. I think it's amazing. So he says, God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. Wow. With God, there's always hope. With God, there's always hope. That is a promise. With God, there's always hope. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as He told me. And we will have no more problems ever again in our life. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. So Paul, he understands this, right? That in the middle of the storm, God's going to be with you. God's going to help you. God's going to maybe even at times protect you and shield you. That doesn't mean the storm stops. Now, granted, I do love the times in Scripture when Jesus stands up and rebukes a storm and everything goes still. I love those times. And there's times that I've actually experienced that. But for the rest of us, at most of the other times, what happens? It's not that the storm stops. It's not that we just have peace in the middle of it, but it's still going to get rough. We still have to run aground, and it's still going to be bad. But I'm here to give you hope. Right? Is this not what we're experiencing now? Pandemic? It's going to be bad. There's still, like, some people I think were like, oh, vaccine, instant, everything's better. What? No. We still have to run aground quite a bit. It's going to be hard. If you just lost someone, yeah, there's going to be times that it's going to get really bad. If you have cancer and you're beating it, there's going to be times you're not going to have anything. If you're emotionally wrecked and you can't see anything out there, God says he's going to be with you, and it's not always going to be smooth sailing. But God has made a promise to be with you. And I think we need to be standing up and giving some encouragement, not false encouragement, not Pollyanna hope, but real hope that anchors us not in our circumstances, but in the one who never changes, and that's Jesus Christ. So if you find yourself in a storm today, if you find yourself really struggling, I have no prophetic word about how it's going to be in your life specifically. But I do have promises in Scripture that talk about what God is going to do. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Jesus at one time prayed to the Father, saying, Father, everyone you have given to me has been saved. We know that nothing can snatch us out of the Father's hand. These are all promises for you and for me. And I think we need to stand up at times and maybe give some encouragement to some people around us. And I know it's easy. Oh, you got coronavirus. Well, I told you you should have been wearing a mask better. Oh, you're getting a divorce. Well, I told you you should be at church and going through counseling. Not helpful. You can tell them, yeah, I understand the situation you're in, and sometimes we find ourselves because of that, but I'm going to give you some hope. Let's stand up and give encouragement to this world around us. Let's pray. Father, it is hard. It is hard to live this life. We've been in a storm for a little while. Some of us are in other storms. We've lost loved ones. We're having mental health issues, and we are about to break. We are facing medical issues that are overwhelming. We have such anxiety over the future and what that holds. Or something has tragically happened in our life, and we just don't know which way is up. I pray that you would, by your grace, ground us and anchor us in Jesus Christ. And then most importantly, Lord, if we are seeing other people struggling, that we don't just sit back and say, well, I'm in a storm myself. There's nothing I can do to help these people. But Paul stood up and courageously gave them hope. May that be who we are, purveyors and granters of hope, grounding people in Jesus Christ. And if we don't have Christ ourselves, may right now we receive Christ into our heart. May we know his love. And Lord, if it be in your will, may the storm stop. I would love that. But if not, if we need to run aground somewhere, we know that sometimes it's still going to be tough. But may we never have our eyes on the storm, but may our eyes always be on Jesus.